In 1983, one of the world's most respected news magazines announced a historical bombshell. They had found Adolf Hitler's secret personal diaries. 60 handwritten volumes. A discovery that would rewrite the history of the 20th century. They paid the equivalent of millions for them. Newspapers around the world bought the rights. Historians authenticated them. There was just one problem. Every single word had been written by a small-time forger in petty crook, using a fountain pen, modern paper, and tea to make it all look old. This is how a clumsy fake fooled the experts and humiliated the world's media. The forger was a man named Konrad Kujau, a dealer in Nazi-era memorabilia in Stuttgart, West Germany. Kujau had a sideline forging documents and artifacts, letters, paintings, manuscripts supposedly from the Nazi period, and selling them to collectors. He was good at the aging tricks. Not good at the history. The story he spun was irresistible, that a cache of Hitler's personal diaries had been aboard a plane that crashed in 1945, and had been secretly recovered and smuggled out of East Germany. The man who took the bait was Gerd Heidemann, a reporter at the German magazine Stern with an obsessive fascination for Nazi relics. Heidemann believed completely. And he convinced his editors. Stern paid an enormous sum for the diaries, around 9 million Deutschmarks, with the total cost of the affair eventually reaching the equivalent of roughly 19 million marks. The magazine was so afraid of the scoop leaking that it kept the diaries tightly secret, rushing toward publication without proper, independent forensic testing of the actual paper and ink. This secrecy was the con's best friend. The fewer experts who could examine the physical documents, the better. In April 1983, Stern held a triumphant press conference announcing the diaries to the world. They licensed the rights internationally. The Sunday Times in Britain bought in. The prominent historian Hugh Trevor Roper initially authenticated them, though he began to express doubts almost immediately, even at the press conference itself. For a few days, it was the biggest story on earth. Then the actual forensic scientists got hold of the volumes, and the whole thing fell apart in spectacular fashion. The Federal Archives of West Germany ran proper tests. The results were devastating. The paper contained an optical brightener, a whitening agent that had not been manufactured until after World War II. The ink was modern. Tests showed the writing had been applied relatively recently, not decades earlier. The binding threads contained polyester, which didn't exist in Hitler's lifetime. And then there was the detail that became legendary. The diary's covers bore an ornate Gothic monogram that Kujau intended to read AH for Adolf Hitler. He'd used the wrong letter. The monogram actually read FH. The forger had mislabeled his own forgery of the most infamous man in history. The diaries were also riddled with historical errors, much of the content lazily copied from an existing published book of Hitler's speeches and proclamations. It was, forensically, not even a particularly good fake. It had simply been protected by secrecy, wishful thinking, and the desperate desire for a once-in-a-century scoop. Konrad Kujau and Gerd Heidemann were both arrested and convicted of fraud and embezzlement. Each served several years. A chunk of the millions Stern paid was never recovered. Heidemann was accused of skimming much of it. The Hitler Diaries fiasco is one of the great cautionary tales in journalism, and its lesson is uncomfortable. The experts didn't fail because they were stupid. They failed because they wanted it to be true. A genuine Hitler diary would have been the discovery of a lifetime, career-defining for the historians, era-defining for the magazine. That desire short-circuited their skepticism. The people who should have demanded rigorous physical testing instead rushed past it, because testing introduced the risk of the answer they didn't want. And the secrecy that the magazine imposed to protect its scoop was the very thing that prevented the independent scrutiny that would have caught the fraud in an afternoon. It's the same dynamic behind so many cons. When an opportunity is thrilling enough and when verifying it threatens to ruin the thrill, people choose the thrill. They authenticate with their hopes instead of their instruments. The simplest forensic test would have caught a brightener in the paper on day one. They just didn't want to look, because they were afraid of what they'd find. The most dangerous moment in any deal is the moment you most want it to be real. Subscribe. New case every Friday.